Okay, thanks everybody for coming. This is a work session on the Our Town Planning Project, and we don't have everybody in their chairs yet, but so close. Susan, would you like to introduce this?
Sure. Why I wanted to introduce this is I wanted to kind of first outline what we were going to do at today's work session and kind of the order of what we're going to do. And in terms of introductory comments, I know Mike Scanlon wanted to add something, so I think he probably will when he comes into the meeting room. But we're going to kick off the meeting with a PowerPoint presentation from DHM. And the purpose of this presentation is really to give us a history on the Pan Fork, to kind of ground us for the subsequent discussion with the P&Z and the Town Council. Then we're going to have a presentation regarding P&Z issues, and then a presentation regarding post issues, and we're going to run that kind of consecutively. So kind of back to back without a lot of discussion. And in the P&Z portion, I'm going to give an overview of the zoning changes that you're looking at, and Dylan Johns, who's the chair of the P&Z, is going to explain why the P&Z made those recommendations. And then we're going to end with Don Elliott from Clarion, and Don is going to kind of follow up with any additional explanation that he feels would help our discussion. And then we're going to have post give an update. Julie Kohler is going to give that presentation, and also the post members and the P&Z members will also be asked if they want to add something to the conversation. We're going to, a big part of this discussion is really to answer 7 questions. And we put those questions in your packet, and they're up there on the wall, kind of adjacent to kind of the item that we're discussing. So the first question really addresses both the P&Z issues and the post issues and what they've been working on. And it's this kind of question of are we in a general agreement at this stage with the proposed park boundaries and the proposed area for development shown for the Pan Fork property. And that's our first question that we're going to talk about. And then our second question is, does the council agree at this stage with the number of stories and the height for our town planning parcels? And then question 3 is, does the council agree with the uses that are being recommended for the 4 parcels? 4, can the P&Z proceed with their process for adopting the CSC zone district regulations? And if 5 is, if the answer is no, then what kind of direction does the council want to give the P&Z? And then 6 are the items that concern the Parks Open Space and Trails Committee. 1 is if the council is supportive of the major ideas, the major elements of the post-planning efforts, and then if the answer is yes, is it still appropriate that we're working towards this July 12th deadline that we'll be talking about a little bit later? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Laura for her history.
Hi, Laura.
Hi, Jackie.
How you doing?
Good. I'm Laura Kirk. I'm with DHM Design, and Jackie called me a couple of weeks ago and asked if I could do a 10-minute history of the planning on the Pan Fork property. And I'm telling you, that is a pretty tall order. So we'll see how I do. So in terms of this, really what I'm going to do is focus on milestones in the planning process, and I'm going to go pretty quickly, and I just want to make sure in that we don't forget the level of passion and commitment and engagement and participation there has been on the part of this community throughout that planning process. And so as I whiz through that, I just want everybody to remember that, because sometimes it will seem as though perhaps we're not giving that its full due. So
can I just stop a second? Would it help at all, especially that screen, to turn the lights down? If somebody thinks it would.
It would.
Okay.
Yes, please.
That helped me.
So there have been a number of past studies that have been done on the Pan and Fork property. The real milestone was in 2002 with the River Stewardship Master Plan, and several of the principles that came out of that planning effort have continued to guide subsequent planning efforts, including removing the levee at relocation of the trailer park, maintaining an open space corridor along the river corridor, and creating developable land along Two Rivers Road. Those principles were incorporated in the 2007 Basalt Master Plan, and so again, reinforcing that work that had been done earlier in 2002. In 2011, there was a major kind of movement in terms of the Pan and Fork property. The Roaring Fork Community Development Corporation and the town of Basalt bought that 5-acre parcel. And with that purchase of that property, planning and design moved forward on both the CDC parcel and the town park parcel, incorporating again those primary concepts from the 2002 River Stewardship Master Plan. Between 2011 and 2012, there were a wide variety of public meetings that happened both on the park parcel and on the CDC parcel in all kinds of venues, and there were presentations to P&Z and the council. One of the concepts that was presented was in the fall of 2012, and that was when the CDC was working with a hotel developer. They had a concept for a hotel on the west end of the property. The RMI side is on this end. In this area, this is Midland Spur, was a proposal for a CMC or a nonprofit center. And then on the kind of corner closer to Two Rivers Road and Midland Avenue was a proposal for mixed use, including some residential. And then on the lower half of the property, the park planning effort was moving forward. Here's an illustration of the hotel proposal that went with that concept. Again, you can see the hotel on the western edge of that property. That was a 3 to 4 story concept. And then underground parking that would have expanded on the entire site. And then as you move towards the intersection of Midland and Two Rivers Road, mixed-use development, including some residential on the top floors. The park planning effort was moving forward with constant kind of check-ins with Post, the public, and council, and P&Z as well. And many of the program items that were envisioned in 2012 are still carried forth in the park planning effort as you see it today, including an event lawn, a band stage, a children's play area, and then some extension of passive recreational and wetland areas. The next major milestone really happened in the fall of 2013 when the Fix the Fork bond was approved by the community. And the approval of that bond allowed river restoration work to proceed on the river corridor itself. And so that's when you saw the work begin in the river corridor, and that also triggered moving forward with the relocation of the trailers. At that time, the community also began a very engaged and intensive process, bringing forth their ideas of their vision for the Pan and Fork property. Those efforts proceeded in a number of different ways. One was with the Our Plan kickoff and the Our Town planning meetings. Those resulted in a whole series of plans that were generated by the community itself. And those ranged from plans that saw very intense development to some plans that saw only park. The next phase of the community planning effort moved forth with 3 site plan options that were presented in June of 2014. And the 3 options were voted on by the community in kind of a web-based, unscientific survey, and looked at different arrangements of development on both the CDC parcel, here, park open space along the river corridor, development in Lions Park, and development in the Clark's Market. So this was the first of those three options. The second option received the most votes from the public in the survey, and the main difference in this option was that there was no development here in the Lions Park area. The third proposal was different from the other two in that it removed Two Rivers Road here, and so it relocated the streets and had intense development then along Midland and the kind of realigned Midland Spur, as well as in the Clark's Market area.
Want to interrupt just 1 second?
Yep.
I know we talked about this, but I can't remember if there's any way that we would have known what these different options' square footage was or anything?
There were, with each of these site plans, there were a whole series of drawings that went with them. In terms of square footage of development, I don't think those were there.
I mean, visually you get an idea.
Visually, you get a little bit of an idea. One of the things is that at this time, there were still trailers in the park. And the trailers were just going through the relocation process. The river restoration construction was underway. So the view that we have now from Two Rivers Road and Midland wasn't available yet to the community. And so I think once the trailers moved and that restoration project moved further along into the fall of 2014, that's when the nature of that property really changed in terms of people's ability to envision how it might be. Then just kind of in this kind of continual process to gauge where the community was at and what their preferences were, there was a scientific survey that was done. There were a series of questions that were asked in that survey. These are just two of the questions where you can see, 40% of the community saw the parcel as a park. The rest of the community was weighing in on different types of development for the park. And then you can see in this question here, the top kind of use for the park was perceived as a restaurant, then a hotel, followed by an active park with no buildings. In October of 2014, the Downtown Area Advisory Committee was formed. And this was a group of individuals that were selected. It was a very diverse group of individuals. Every person on council had an ability to weigh in on that selection process. And the DAC group moved forward trying to bring all of this kind of information that had been going on previously in 2014 into a single plan. They came up with 5 guiding principles, and I think these are important as the planning process continues to move forward. In December of 2014, the DAC came up with their master plan, and it looked at development in a number of different locations, on the Clark's parcel, on Lions Park, Merino Park, on the CDC parcel as well. But one of the kind of big things that came out of the DAC in addition to the development areas was the idea of the Big V. And that Big V really came about because now the trailers had been relocated and the views to the river were apparent in a number of different locations. Moving along at the same time, Lowe's Development was working with the CDC and had reached kind of a development agreement with the CDC and was moving some development proposals forward. The Lowe's Development Group, had incorporated the Big V into their proposal. This was one of their proposals that included a hotel and a series of mixed-use development. They envisioned development in this, what they called the wedding cake, which would be kind of a mixture of 3, 3.5, and 4-story buildings. This is an illustration of that development from the south side of the river. Sure. The square footage on the first proposal from Lowe's was 155,000 square feet. In April of 2015, Council was having one of its regularly scheduled quarterly meetings, and they took up the discussion of what was starting to feel appropriate in terms of development for that parcel based on the proposals from Lowe's, from community input, which was being derived from a variety of public meetings and meetings both with P&Z and Council. And that resulted in a new diagram, and you can see here that now the private development is looked at as occurring from the Midland Spur west, and that everything east of the Midland Spur would be, it was in what has now become called the Polygon, as well as the park and open space maintaining the Big V. That drawing and that concept was further refined through a process with the P&Z and the council to develop this amendment, including this new map to go into the previously approved DAC master plan. And this revised map includes, again, the Big V, and you'll see, again, development west of the Midland Spur. To help the community understand, what does all this mean? Because you look at all these maps and it's really hard to kind of envision what does this look like. And so the model behind you was commissioned to help put that sort of into 3D perspective. And there are a number of parts of that model that can pop in and out so that different development proposals can be looked at and evaluated. One of the proposals included a new development plan from the Lowe's Development Group, looking at 55,000 square feet of development. There was also a proposal from the Citizens Petition Group that looked at a slightly smaller amount of square footage and configured in a different massing, so lower view planes. While the discussion about the development on the CDC parcel has continued to move forward, so too have the design efforts for the park planning effort. And all through 2015, we had a variety of meetings with Post, the community, et cetera, and here's a drawing by one of the Post members helping us to look at development of the park design. In February of this year, we presented this overall park master plan to the council and received approval to continue moving forward with the Post committee. And you'll see here, consideration of the Big V with an active park area in that location. This is the Polygon area where we've been looking at a restaurant and some uses like that, the children's play area, and then continuation down to the passive park. And associated with that have been drawings of different elements, including the children's play area. So that is the 10-minute history overview. And I think then, Dylan and others will talk, as Susan said, about where the P&Z is, and Julie can give more information about where we are in the park design and how we've arrived at the drawings as they are.
Laura's staying here, so if later you have questions when we're in the Q&A, we can get to additional questions then.
Okay, thank you.
So your packet information also kind of continuing in that vein of history included what are some of the major decisions or direction that the council gave, and where did those decisions happen? What date were they approved? And we kind of follow up with a list of all the resolutions that I referred to in kind of this decision piece, and then other important resolutions. But before Dylan starts, I just wanted to kind of leave us with that we did kind of emphasize, we did amend the 2007 master plan to include our town planning master plan amendment. And so the future land use map for these 4 parcels that we're talking about is now this. And it's very similar to the dock plan, just kind of re-emphasizing it. It kind of enlarged this, the big V area, and it also made some additional clarifications. It took off the actual number of stories that was on the dock plan, and it indicated that you should measure on that map. But this is the master plan map now for our town area. The P&Z was directed to to work on a new master plan that incorporated the dock provisions, and they are also directed to look at the zoning. And you've seen in prior documents kind of the iterative process that the P&Z did with Don Elliott, who's been our consultant and is available. We brought him in by phone instead of bringing him all the way here. And again, he's going to kind of wrap up with our discussion. But the decision was to use the CSC zone district, which is this community serving commercial zone district that the council had adopted early on in the process for the Pan and Fork property. But the changes that the P&Z made, they're really highlighted on page 3 of your packet. But one of the main things was to revise the district so that it would apply to all 4 of the R-Town parcels. So we have the CDC property, the BCC property, which is kind of an expanded area of the Aspinalt, the Prinster Cabins, the Restore Store. It actually includes a little bit of the Alpine Bank building and the gas station. It includes Lions Park and then Merino Park. So one of the main things that the district did was to kind of develop regulations that kind of applied to all 4 parcels. One of the first discussions that the P&Z had was, what is community serving? Because it was a community serving commercial zone district. And the original concept was that you had to be a nonprofit campus, but the discussion with the P&Z was that community serving meant that it had to have an anchor use. And they related the anchor use to uses that the town council or the town had mentioned, of uses that the town really wanted to see in these 4 parcels, and it was kind of supportive of the vitality ideas that were coming from the dock report. And so those uses were a wide variety: a grocery store, hotel, a brew pub, distillery, and it also included kind of this idea of a community center here. And community center was to kind of get at the idea that the citizen petition group was advocating, is that we have community uses on the CDC property. So how this chart kind of works is that you have to have an anchor use on, you have to have one anchor use on each one of the parcels. And here's our kind of our list of options of our anchor use. So you have a choice of which anchor use that you can have. Once there's an anchor use that's committed, then you can have it a secondary use. And I think that's a concept that I think some people have a harder time grasping, is that there's a whole list of secondary uses that could be permitted on the property. And they include the anchor use without these kind of square footage or size limitations. It includes vitality uses, C2 uses. It allows fully deed restricted affordable housing units. You know, one of the maybe things to point out is that free market residential units are only permitted under the current draft in the BCC property and in Lions Park, and that they're small units. They're limited to 1,400 square feet. So that's how the kind of the uses work. In terms of the dimensional requirements, the model really helped, I think, the P&Z get a grasp of how many stories would be permitted on the property. And so generally you're seeing everything on Two Rivers Road is 2.5 stories, and by 2.5 stories, that meant that you could allow a third story, but the third story had to be pulled back 10 feet from the road. That 2.5 stories also kind of carries on the CDC property in that that third story has to be pulled back from the sides of the property adjacent to the river, and there are some exceptions that the town council can consider. The place where 4 stories is permitted is on the BCC property, but only really in the interior of the property. And if you had a grocery store, the height was allowed to be slightly higher than that. And on our chart, if you're looking up here, kind of the number of stories and the height is kind of bolded on our graph here, and kind of the kind of provisions about the height and number of stories are outlined down here. One of the things that P&Z is still kind of looking at is the exact location of where buildings can be 4 stories on the BCC property. We're planning a site visit this coming week to kind of look at that, and we might change the distance, this 150 feet from the Frying Pan River. That's kind of this buffer area where we're only allowing the taller buildings in the middle of the property. And so that maybe is a future discussion item. And that's all I really want to kind of highlight, and I'll turn it over now to Dylan to kind of maybe explain in more detail why, and to emphasize maybe things in the zoning that I didn't emphasize.
Welcome, Dylan.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for coming back again.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And just thank you for your tenacity and vision, and
If there's other people on the planning commission that are here, could we just recognize them?
We have Gino Rossetti here and Eric Wozniak.
Anybody else?
no, I think it's-
Anyway, we appreciate you in the same breath. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you all. Thank you, Susan, for,
I'm just turning the lights
That
on.
was so
okay.
not Gino, but
I think Susan gave a pretty thorough run through of some of the technical aspects of what's being proposed for the CSC zoning. I think the packet did a great job of kind of outlining some of the factors along with Laura's presentation of how we got here. The discussions on P&Z have gone on for a long time about planning in general, the planning process, and we started with the entrance to Basalt really, and then this sort of grew out of that. So there's been a lot of thought and in some ways disagreement about how exactly the best way to go about kind of looking at these different parcels and how each one of them has its own set of properties to it and lends itself potentially to doing different things. I think where we've gotten to with all the feedback the community's put into this and the committees over the years has resulted in something which is starting to look potentially like something in here, which is at some points during this process felt like a long, long way off. And so from the planning standpoint of things, we definitely prioritize looking at all of these parcels together. We weren't trying to specifically design any one project to fit on one piece of property. If we were going to go through this much trouble and try to encapsulate all of the ideas which were discussed during this whole process, we felt like it was best to do that for all of the properties which were kind of part of this general area. The things like the anchor use table came up because we really wanted to try to identify things which we felt the town may be lacking in some capacity, and that we all felt very strongly that if these things were added to the fabric of town, that there would be more completeness, more life as a result of that. And that list is probably on its third generation or so at this point. but we really didn't spend a whole lot more time to further refine it after that, just because with everything going on, we kind of wanted to make sure that everyone was in agreement at least with how we were approaching this, and then involve some further discussion and getting into the details, which aren't necessarily as exciting or as pretty as some of the graphics of the park. But nevertheless are very important to the overall picture. So as Susan described, the goal here was to try to think of a list of things which we felt like were missing in the town, missing in the community, that needed a place to land, and really just kind of by feel said, which of these parcels do we think those could live on, both from a scale perspective of what they need to be in order to work, and then also just the character of each one of those 4 parcels that are diagrammed on the map. As far as the dimensional requirements goes, we tried to think of this in a more general aspect than how these things typically wind up being codified. And the main reason behind that was because that, frankly, through the discussions and the backs and forths with what developable area and just the general ways that one calculates FAR in particular and height, it's really, really difficult without doing some very thorough and usually very specific studies related to that specific piece of land as to what a FAR ratio needs to be, what a height limit needs to be. So in order to kind of keep things moving without getting bogged down in all of that, the approach that we took was to say, our goal is to try to think of a parameter which will, at the end of the day, result in something which we think that would fit within the community's scale and character, that I think was a pretty big focus on a lot of people's minds, irregardless of how much of the CDC parcel was park or developable area. So we tried to look at it from a stories point of view. How many stories would that be? How many stories would fit? And then looking at it from the numbers side of things, because everybody seems to feel a little bit better if you put a number next to it, to try to say, okay, a reasonable explanation or expectation for a floor-to-floor height is X, whatever it is. If we're going to propose a 2.5-story building concept, that means the building height is going to be fit within this range. That means basically from the ground floor, the street level, that's what that involves. Most of these sites involve a grade change that happens from the street across to the other edge of the property. And so as you sort of build into that, your formal height definition starts to grow as you reach the end of that. And we wanted to try to allow for some flexibility also to happen, because frankly, with as general of a program as we described and as general of a concept as we were working with, to say that X number of square feet is the upper limit on things, and if you go above that, it usually is a rather big deal, because you have to go and you have to ask for permission to put that in. And then a lot of people get very concerned that, no, we'd agreed to this number, now they're asking to increase it, and that's a bad thing. And that's just kind of a reflex reaction that has happened, not necessarily unjustifiably because of other developments in the past. But our feeling was that if a truly amazing project came along, we wanted them to be able to work within those sort of volumetric restraints that we had established for each of the properties, and have them come and tell us what that means. There were a few other things that we were considering, which were pedestrian connections and visual connections through the properties. All along, that was a very important part of the discussion, and the connection of the river, both of the rivers, because the BCC parcel is also connecting to the frying pan. And so what we were trying to do there was there is a number in there for a landscaped open space in the table, but more importantly than that, was to really try to define some corridors and where we really wanted a pedestrian link, which was going to be functional and practical enough that restaurants could set up tables out there, or something could happen in those spaces that would be useful. So I think I might just stop there and kind of leave the rest to questions, because there's so much to cover. I don't want to take too much time going through that, but certainly questions, I'm sure there will be.
Well, I think I still have Dawn on the phone. Dawn, are you there?
Yes, I am.
I was just wondering if you wanted to add, kind of wrap up the CSC zone district discussion and add anything to this, to what we've been doing?
Yeah, no, I've enjoyed listening to the background, and it's very helpful to review it. Yes, I'll keep it very short. My job is to try to get you a tool that will work over, not just on the day you adopt it, but over time as unexpected things happen. So I'm not an expert on downtown Basalt. I love it. I have been there. I've looked at the plans. I've looked at the model. You guys have obviously put a lot of work into it, but I really can't add much to what do you want to be when you grow up or regrow up. Instead, the thing I've tried to focus on is this: building in something that is not enough framework. And the framework, as has been explained, is the anchor uses and the flexibility to move them around, but you're going to get the important things, the big rocks that make the rest of it work, and they can be moved around. And the second part is secondary uses, or the ones that can come after that. It's very flexible. And the third part is the design standards. And believe me, I have seen very few planning commissions sweat the details as much as this one has. I can't tell you whether it's right because I don't live in Basalt, but I can tell you they have given it a huge amount of thought to try to figure out how you allow some math without having it be in anybody's face. So the one thing I'd say is this: it's important to think it's important not to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. If you try to sweat this down to the last detail, you'll never get there. And it'll be a mistake, because I've seen lots of overly specific plans get undone. As a matter of fact, regularly to undo detailed regulations that were so detailed that nobody came to the party and nobody could do anything. And over time, you just go back and try to redo it again because you over-sweated the details. And so my goal has been to say, if you get the basic things right, you won't have to do a PUD each time. It'll have some advantages to the developer. Each developer and property owner will have a fair idea of what the runs around them are going to do, and that there'll be some synergy into the thing as a whole. But if one of them walks away from the table, one of them loses their shirt in the real estate market, one of them has to sell their property to an unknown party who has slightly different values, the thing doesn't fall apart. It's not shrink-wrapped around a property or a developer or a picture, so that hopefully when the unexpected happens, the next person in owning that property will still say, this has got good opportunities for me. I could do something. And I'll do all this work. So I would just, I'll be happy to answer any questions, but I often find that, especially in really key parcels in smaller communities, people are just reluctant to say this is good, let's go, because they keep wanting to see exactly what it's going to be like, and no matter how hard you try, you're not going to be able to do that. So, enough said.
Message received.
Okay. And the only last thing I'll say is Tom isn't sitting here beside me, but I know you wanted to emphasize that we're not planning on zoning the property CSC. This is kind of a tool that a property owner can use. It gives direction to what we have. It has a two-step process, which would be very, just turn it down like this, very advantageous to someone seeking approvals through the town of Basalt. But it doesn't prevent a developer from submitting a C3 PUD or creating another zoning district. So that's all I really wanted to say about, yeah.
Before we turn it over to Julie, Gina would like to
Oh.
say a few words.
Oh, yeah, we were gonna offer it to Gino.
A little bit of the same, but I think that just for bringing people up to date that haven't been with it, part of the things that the Planning and Zoning Commission really hyped on, and that's why the separation of the spaces, is that each of these parcels is a different character to it. The character and the idea that you'd have down in here is primarily kind of a second cousin to the park. The park has been, by all stretches of the imagination, the driving force that's there. So the buildings that are there are really kind of borrowing on that text, and that the people that would come from the town are definitely coming either to the park or to the hotel or the hotel functions, and then using the park. So it's a common, different kind of use. Likewise, a different kind of use up on the park. The thought being that is a very some huge majestic trees that are there that should not come down, even though it's interfering a little bit with the big V. But the thought being that that's the most one of the better uses for it, and what the community has also asked for in the different surveys that were taken, is that perhaps that the art base could expand in that area and be a part of that, because it's again the same kind of training and usage to the park. That is, that you've got kids, you've got adults, you've got a myriad of different things that are happening with both the art center and what is planned for there. Whether or not the council of the community, or the town building should remain there or not, that's another subject that either could be or couldn't be as a part to the other. I have a bias on it, but it doesn't matter. And then the last little part is mostly thought of as probably the better use of housing of one form. Affordable housing would be a very good aspect of it because of the closeness to the town, the hill that's there in the background, and it's kind of separated from the difficult traffic, but the idea of the Sunday market is still in proper use to everything. And then finally, the scale and the whole thought process about the main Clark Market property there is that it is not the same as this property. It's a property that really is going to be building generated, and hopefully part of the usage would be to mirror the buildings that are over here, which is both retail and housing involved with it. So it continues that, moving it into the general shape. And along with that, there's a sizable amount of land which is ideal for an underground parking with building on top of it. And then the usage for that would be perhaps for larger buildings. Whether or not another hotel could be sustained there or not is another factor, but there are other activities that could be there that are used both by the people and also the buildings. But also the fact about it is that this is a beautiful park down and an aspect to the Frying Pan River, which you don't want to take second cousin to the Roaring Fork, and it makes it natural to tie back to the park. And so we thought this would be a great way that the linear quality to it, or curvilinear quality to it, would really be all just pedestrian. And on that pedestrian could be temporary kiosks, if you will, or different kind of merchants, so that this is a very active and viable kind of retail that is vitality both to the existing building and to the new. And then finally, this is also an opportunity to tie back to the older buildings on Midland, so that the people have good walkways and good parkways to it, and you can offset that with elderly people, kiosks and things like that. So there are 4 properties, almost with 4 different characters, but all doing the same thing for the revitalization of the town.
Thanks, Gino.
And so, Eric, did you want to?
I got nothing right now.
So I think now we're ready for Julie to come up and talk.
I'm trying to decide if I want to stand by the map or sit here. I guess I can do both, yeah. Hi, I'm Julie. Thanks for coming, Julie. Some of you have heard me
long, long, long time of work and creativity. And also, I would like you to please recognize other people
Paul and
from
Cindy, I think that's it for us. Yeah.
names,
We're
just
only
names,
four.
because we're on TV and all.
Cindy Bruce, Paul Hill. Yeah.
Paul Mills.
Thanks, guys. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're super passionate. I think we have the unique opportunity / challenge to design a park around development that we don't know what it's gonna be. So it's kind of interesting. Really, the genesis of where we came from was, taking a look at the uniqueness of the parcel itself. All of the things that may be appropriate for it, maybe desired by it, enjoyed there. Also taking a look at our entire inventory as a town. We've got a lot of amazing parks, open space and trails, and so kind of weighing that in the balance. And then, of course, taking a look at the big picture that planning and zoning so eloquently stated of all the different possibilities and things that are happening around it. So this really sits at the center of quite a bit. We, of course, listened deeply to all of the input that we could possibly get our hands on. Community input, the surveys that Laura mentioned, discussions, open house, pretty much, you guys telling us what you thought and what you wanted, individual community members, we listened to it all. And what we tried to do is come up with, the aesthetics and the programming, at least loosely this far, that kind of address the majority of what those desires and outcomes looked like. So for the most part, we're creating a space that is very community-centric. It invites a lot of different things without over-programming itself. There's a fine line between being inviting and being just wide open that nobody really wants to be there. So we're carefully weighing those kind of energies. Really want to have a place where all of the Mid-Valley wants to spend their time versus trekking to Aspen to go to Heron Park and to go to the fountains there. And, this is really such a great central opportunity for those kind of catches. So we did talk, and Laura mentioned a little bit about some of the vitality pieces, creating a stage where we could have events, creating sort of a food and drink event potential type area where there could be, all different kinds of things going on that really is the life of the party, if you will, because I think if we create this giant open space but we don't have things going on, you've missed the opportunity. So that's really important to us. We've gone so far to study a little bit of the architecture, mainly because what we need to do is wrap our arms around, well, what would fit there? What would be appropriate? How much does it cost? Does it feel better to orient it here or there? And so we've gone into some looser kind of studies to start to address some of those details, and really aiming toward midsummer and trying to get some pricing. I think that it's a very challenging kind of one step in front of the other where, okay, well, what do we want? Well, what does it cost? And how can that be built and whatnot? Phasing, of course, is going to be a part of our discussion at all times because this is not, it's beautiful. It's not inexpensive. So we have to try to understand that and be responsible about what some of those opportunities are. I've had some great conversations with community members wanting to discuss, well, why did you put the stage in the corner, and why is the restaurant in the polygon, and what? And we really did look at a lot of different things. We probably tried on every outfit imaginable, and I think everybody's an idealist, and we all want to have this be as amazing as it can be. So you mix sort of what those ideals are with practicalities, costing, mobilization even, how things are constructed, where the utilities are. We're trying to actually be very active in our thought process so that we cover all those bases and don't just design something that looks good on paper, but something that's going to actually be sustainable and buildable. I think that probably covers it. I can kind of go through some of the details. I know most of you have seen this map. It hasn't changed really at all since the last time we presented it, but for if there's any questions about what we have going on there, I'd be happy to. Oh, one last really important point. We placed the buildings in this general area based on where we were at the time when we started this. These really don't mean anything specific other than what council was talking about, what the development was sort of talking about. It's merely placeholder. And it's there because we know there's probably gonna be something going on, and so we need to react to that. But that being said, everything that happens around the edges of that, whether they go way into that and there's more park or there's less, or we have no idea at this point, that is all adjustable. Any aspect of the park design will be modified to reflect what's happening in those developable areas so that there's a real synergy. So it's not like lines in the sand of, well, there's a building here and then we're gonna design a park here. I mean, we really want them to go together. So we're kind of waiting and kind of holding our breaths a little bit to define some of the definition around this area, but at the same time, we're doing the best we can given what we know. So none of it's set in stone, but for the most part, the programming elements are a reflection of everything we've heard, everything we've studied, hopefully what everybody wants. Is that possible? I don't know, but we're trying. So I think that's it.
Thanks, Julie.
Yeah.
You guys have questions for Julie?
One, have you considered, or is it even possible for the kayak park to be moved from its proposed location to something that would be integrated into this park?
I think it's a great question. It was one of my first questions too, when that was talked about. My understanding, Mike can probably speak to this more specifically, but the kayak park is really centered around water usage and rights and Pickens County's. It's necessary for them to establish very specific elements in the river at the location it's at. The second piece of that is, my understanding is that the way the river drops and the way it actually flows right in front of the park here doesn't have enough volume or speed to actually be able to create a wave, so it's not actually the best location. Even if it were an option, it's not actually the best location topographically in terms of how the river behaves there and what's actually ideal for a park. There is actually, though, right here, so if you look at more active side of the park, getting more passive part, there's actually ability to put in and take out like kayaks in this general area. So we're trying to allow for that understanding that wouldn't it be great if people were floating and getting out here, but having an actual wave and formal park going on here, it's just not possible. From everything that I've understood and everything that we've gone through, and it's not because we don't think it's a great idea, because I think it's an awesome idea. It's the logistics. Yeah.
And my other question is, looking at this park, and it's obviously right on the water, the enticement is that everyone wants to be in the water, have their feet in the water, get their legs in the water. Does the plan currently have safe access for people to get in the water to a reasonable, safe depth?
Sure. So because the river is what it is, and because it's actually kind of massive and fast moving, I mean, it's the character of the river, these little jetties of land that kind of come out here are going to be meant to be able to climb on. I mean, you can already see sort of the general structure of them. The way we're going to actually create the landscaping is that you can use them. You can sit out there on the edge, maybe dangle your feet in. The focus, though, is that we created this sort of inland, utilizing the natural inland stream that flows here as the majority of the child's play area. So this really is much safer. That's actually the drawing, either screen there, of what something like that could look like. Because truthfully, the river is massive and it's fast. So it's not like we could create some artificial safe zone there. I think at lower waters, you could, as adults, you might sit on the edge, you might kind of dip in. I'm sure, there will be fishing that goes on there. But really, that's the whole reason why this is so special and so important, because it is safe, it's shallow, it's not actually a river, that sort of thing. So does that answer your question?
It does. I just wanted to make sure that we had safe
There are
access for people to be playing in the water.
Julie, do you want to mention over by the Rumford Conservancy that?
Yeah.
This pond area?
Well, and
Or this?
No, up by the Conservancy, that kind of the plan.
Yeah, sure.
And the little park access there,
So, yeah, and jump in if I
for
miss
that's
something.
children. For the
Yeah,
children.
exactly. So in thinking, much like P&Z, we're trying to think of this as a whole big giant thing, not just one little thing happening here. So the idea of allowing Old Palm Park and the Roaringford Conservancy and this whole conglomeration of water-oriented stuff to be yet another safe, friendly, kid-oriented as well as adult-oriented area the pond itself, more interactive with a fishing pier, really good access all the way around. And then closer to the Conservancy, there's been discussion of creating wetland gardens that offer both learning opportunities as well as just, truly beautiful visual interaction. So I can imagine that when all of this happens, and there's a lot of passive nature of this inland stream that happens, and we've got a number of little trail crossings and stuff that goes on here. A lot of this is wetland and boardwalk kind of interaction. But again, this area down here, I think, can be a lot of that. It's not a swimming hole, so to speak, literally to answer your question, but there is more interactive opportunity going on there that's safer and not, super high intensity river.
Great, thank you.
Other questions?
Hi, Julie, I'm Jen.
Hi, Jen.
Regarding your mention of the staged approach, tell me, for post's consideration, what are the priorities, and do you have any staged ideas?
I think that's a really good question that I think is going to be better answered in the time ahead of us. As we start looking at costing, as we start looking at the development piece, and if those things can kind of start merging, I think the schedule will become a little more obvious. To date, and Laura can speak to this much better, but the restoration of the landscape itself has been brought to a sustainable place. Some of the trails and a lot of the wetlands trails and a lot of this work has actually been done. I don't know if you've been down in there.
I walk there every evening.
Yeah, it's really amazing. So there's a lot of work that's been done that's going to fill in over time with the natural vegetation and whatnot. And the rest of it is really going to be, the phasing that you talk about is probably going to be as price dependent as it is relative to the development that goes on. So I don't know if there's any specific plans to get a phasing approach, but the two kind of go together with the costing estimate.
Yeah, I think we're, depending on how you answer some of these questions tonight, we're gonna continue moving forward to come up with baseline construction costs, and that will help start to define phasing implementation.
I mean, we initially were kind of hoping that we could finish a lot of the work that was around Old Pond so that we could get the handicap access and kind of the use of the pond. And we were kind of hoping optimistically that we might be able to do that this year, but.
We are speaking with architects, lighting designers. Obviously, we have a hugely talented landscape architect on board. So that is kind of the costing phasing homework we're doing at this time, is to try to understand as best we can what sort of cost ratios we're in. I think that sort of roundaboutly answering your question, a lot of the design does reflect, at least to the best of our ability, some sort of a sustainable design or building approach, such as mobilizing utilities in concentrated locations. So we're not stringing buildings on opposite ends of the park. We're kind of trying to keep things together so that we can piggyback on other utility work that's being done. So there's certain, I guess, not formal phasing ideas that have happened, but in the design process, those are considerations that we use while we're locating things and while we're making considerations for certain amenities.
I didn't know if Paul and Cindy, you guys wanted to add anything else? Paul?
No, I think
Cindy?
Julie.
Can I ask Susan about the mention of the Old Pond Park? And what is the phasing on that, and is there funding for that?
Well, I think we'll have a better picture. What our schedule has been is we've been gearing towards this July 12th meeting. So we are hoping to have in-house a lot of the work. Actually, we're going to be meeting shortly with DHM to kind of look at some of the initial costs. So this July 12th date was really what was kind of driving, and the purpose of the July 12th date originally was that we were thinking that we might go for a bond in November, and in order to do that, there's only like a week play. If we did like a first reading of an ordinance on July 12th and a second reading 2 weeks later, I think the way it laid out that we only had like about a week of play in there, that we could delay something and still get it on the ballot. So one of our questions, of course, is it still appropriate that we're working on that July 12th schedule, but that's kind of what we're lining up. So we're meeting tomorrow, actually, to look at some of the costs, and I don't know all of what we're gonna see tomorrow, so.
Question on that.
Uh-huh.
I thought the certification date for a ballot question was September.
There is a, we need Pam here for this, but she was the one that kind of, she was kind of running the dates for us before, and
Okay.
it's because we have to,
You have
pass
to
an
recommend it
ordinance,
to,
and then
you have
we
to
have
pass a resolution to
yes.
recommend it to the
You
ballot.
have to have agreement of the ordinance twice for a bond issue, so.
Right.
And then tell the county that we're gonna have the language, and we have so long to get the language in. So there was a little play, but not very much
I
in
know
terms of.
it is summer though, because we've done this routine through RAFTA with questions that have to go on November ballots, and it's the same thing, you have to have readings and public hearing or whatever to get it
I mean,
done.
I think there was just a little flexibility on the time, but you don't wanna say you have to decide tonight.
Right. Yeah.
So then for myself and for the public, are there any funds available that we do have to put towards this? Just to start that conversation going of how many eggs do we have in our basket?
Well, we have a kind of a budget that we had, up on the wall that Post was working on in terms of how much money that we had for, 2015 and, 2016, and how much we had for 2017. And, we have money for kind of this planning exercise, but there's not a lot of money for construction. And I think you might remember, a couple meetings ago when Mike was doing the financial kind of bigger picture, and he had some ideas about how much it's gonna cost for the park, and we know it's gonna be bigger than that, so. I think part of it is what is our strategy? Is our strategy a big GoCo grant? Is it land purchase? Is it phasing over time? Is it, the petition group has a proposal on how they think that, how they could envision helping. So there's some ideas out there. There's no magic bullet. I mean, we don't have a large pot of money because we have allocated our parks, open space, and trails money. I mean, that graph that Laura showed earlier about we're using money to pay off the bonds using post funds. We've got a significant portion of money being used for the Basalt Avenue underpass. We're reserving some money for Auburn Park.
And if I could just suggest, because the money conversation could take us completely off trying to answer these questions and move a little bit farther on the vision, which I was hoping that we could do tonight, and I think Susan came up, whoever, I assume it was Susan, staff person came up with some questions to sort of get us generated going in a direction, or, so maybe you wanna walk us through.
Sure. But
I
can
guess,
just ask one
sure,
first?
sure.
My understanding, to get this plan to a point in which we can start actually constructing some of these ideas, we've budgeted $255,000 just for planning. Is that, just so we know, because one of the questions is, are we supportive of these major elements? And just for the initial soft costs, we're looking at $255,000, is my understanding. Is that, okay?
Correct.
And that's no construction?
Or no?
Or no past costs. Correct.
Okay.
And that's allocated for 2016 solely, or 2016 and 17?
2016.
Okay.
So I think back to, I think that it's really difficult to put the money in front of the planning and design, because it's really difficult to ever get the design finished if you're always trying to get the money. So I would ask this council if we could help Susan answer some of these questions, and then when we get our vision a little bit more clear, then I think, that's how I approach buying things. I decide what I'm gonna buy first. So, Susan, do you wanna?
Sure.
Well, can I just interrupt one more time? I guess a couple things I wanted to just take note of from this discussion was, for anybody who doesn't know this or assumes something else, this whole CSC zoning deal will be an option for somebody who wants to come in. They could also do a PUD, planned unit development, or a trailer park, oh, I didn't say that. And also, I think the gist of what Susan's gonna get us to is we really need to pretty clearly, I mean, I know a lot of people here are new, but pretty clearly direct our staffs and our volunteer boards with regard to what we're gonna end up with, anchor uses, secondary uses, kind of like Don Elliott said on the phone. And the one thing that that came together in my mind from something Gino said and Julie said was, because Gino said this park is pushing all of this at this point. It didn't used to be. When there was a trailer park over there, any kind of development sounded great because it was a trailer park. And now it's kind of the other way around, where the park is pushing the development. And so when Julie said, we need to know what you're gonna build before we know how to design the park, and I guess one of the thoughts might be, maybe we design the park that we want and the development is designed around the park, because that is the thing that we own, and maybe we will own more than we do now, but right now we own a park. So that's just a thought that I have about moving forward.
That's actually how we approached it.
Okay, good. Okay, Susan. Oh, I'm sorry, Jen.
So before we answer the questions, are we going to have an opportunity to ask questions of P and Z? Okay, great.
Sure, I would just say that if we have, what we could do, my suggestion on that, Jen, would just be, like, let's go to the specific question that we're asking the question on, and then you can ask P and Z then. Does that work? So if we have a question about uses, and are you ready to go forward, and P and Z can go forward with kind of its hearing
Yeah,
process.
let's try to get through this because it was in the packet, and if your questions don't fit in here, then we'll have your questions.
They do, exactly.
Okay.
I'd like to ask a question first because it
Sure.
reads into, what is on the delineation on the CDC parcel between the east and the west? Is it the polygon? Is it the angled side or the straight side?
The exact line, okay, the zoning isn't saying where the exact line is. So the zoning isn't saying, where's my thing? It's not looking at that little line there and saying that's the line. It's just that this portion here is park and this portion is development. The actual, when someone comes in with their development plan, they'll be saying where that exact line is. So this, we're not applying it to the land, we have a zoning district itself. So when you're talking about the east portion being the park, that's this portion, and the west portion being the portion there. And you're kind of looking at the map. In the zoning district, the map, there's actually a little map in your zone district, and we'll clean that up a little bit and make it nicer, but there's actually a little map in your.
Do you have a thought, Dylan?
Yeah, so this question gets to what I was trying to describe in some way with this whole, we're not exactly sure how big the parcel is, we're not exactly sure how tall it might be depending on when you measure it. Our focus was really not to get into the physical constraints of any of these sites. It was simply to try to develop a working program for an alternative zoning which would hopefully incentivize and follow through with the goals that were outlined in the DAC report and all the other kind of community feedbacks that were received. So where that line was drawn in a diagram, and that's as much definition as that is.
I would add one thing, that we talked about this idea of the polygon, and if someone wanted to come in with a brewery, as an example, not saying someone's proposed that, and they wanted to have a beer garden that overflows into that polygon, that's kind of a cool use that we don't want to limit them from proposing that by saying the line is here.
Right, excellent.
And then the next question is, on the anchor use table, community housing is the definition of and I know that there's also definitions in here. Does that include affordable housing?
That was the intent of community housing.
Okay.
Affordable, attainable, whichever term you want to apply to
Sure.
it, but yes.
Okay. And then my third and final question is, the consideration, I recognize that these are the anchor uses. There is a daycare issue within our town. Can you explain why daycare facility isn't involved in this?
It probably just didn't make the list, just because no one thought of it.
And I would say it's a secondary use, so it wasn't, like, if you look at nonprofit, nonprofit uses are allowed as a secondary use. I'm not sure.
But I think-
Daycare that complies with state requirements regulating daycare is use J, it's just not an anchor use. So you'd have to have a primary use, then you could have J, which is the daycare.
That may fit into the youth center definition though, because that was something which I think back when we were planning this from the entrance to Basalt was the recognition that there really was no venue for youths of any age to really gather and hang out and do things. So whether that kind of folds into that or not, I think that kind of probably was covering that aspect of the discussion.
Just wanted to ensure that to the public out there, we are thinking about it and considering it. And then on the dimensional requirements, can you explain why on the grocery store, footnote number 2, any portion of the building containing a grocery store may have a maximum height of 49 feet? How does the figure of 49 feet come about?
There were some logistics when we were talking about the height of what a grocery store needs to be, and then trying to add something on top of that as a use.
Okay.
Is kind of where that came up.
Okay. So that's kind of classic interior grocery store ceiling height with, okay.
Recognized to be a higher space, and then did we want to still have that be a 2-story or from a functional standpoint or more?
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Somewhat redundant from Jen's question, based on the fact that P&Z doesn't want to define east versus west. But how does this zoning protect the big V if we're not willing to draw a line?
It
Is there
does not.
There isn't, okay.
Well, just to kind of add to that though, the district itself has the map, the big V has to be protected, and there's language in there, and then the view corridors. So if you look on page 6 of your amended zone district, you'll see that this required view pedestrian opening number 1 has to be, and it describes the Lions Park parcel. It's this one. It's really just an excerpt from the master plan map.
So, kind of to what Katie's saying, the very first question is, do we agree with the proposed park boundaries? So I guess I need a redundancy lesson here of exactly which diagram is that, which image is that?
Well, I was actually pointing to both images, and keep in mind the language here is we're saying, are you generally okay with it at this stage? Keep in mind this is a work session. You haven't had a public hearing.
Correct.
You'll have a public hearing actually on both these, on the zoning piece and on the park piece, because you'll have a site plan approval for it. So what we're trying to do here is, is kind of say, are you generally okay with the opening here that's shown, reflected in the CSC zone district, and are you okay, generally with the boundary here?
Resolution 19 over there is kind of what we were using, is that sort of delineation.
Okay.
So that eastern line kind of is on the polygon, not all the way over into the overviewing this.
If we could just all just raise our hand and be addressed, because Bernie's been sitting here with his hand up and everyone's talking.
So the revised master plan that we adopted in February, which is essentially the OTP plan.
Yep.
So that is the town of Basalt's master plan to be used and considered, but it is not totally prescriptive. somebody could come in with a PUD and choose to do something quite different, or is the protection come not at the master plan level, but at some lower level? You said it's not necessarily at the most granular level.
Notice that Mike's leaning away from me.
Since I was the one that formulated this question, and I said, you know, a question that we're gonna have to go back and address is the park boundaries. It's been said, it's been prescribed, but it hasn't been decided. And you have to come to a point where you say, this is the edge of the park. Does this picture present to you what you believe is the western edge of that park as viewed from the Big V? Is that it?
One more question. I think I heard this evening that the park includes the polygon.
Yes, and then you also heard that a development, if it had like a use that's been described as public, a restaurant, a beer garden,
Sure.
would that be considered a use for the polygon?
Okay. Jen, Jen, did you have something else?
Oh, I'm playing with my pen, excuse
Okay.
me.
Yes.
I'm thinking.
Well, I was gonna say that I don't think we wanna go down too far into detail, but the plans that we're working on with Post are showing some pretty cool plans for the polygon. And the idea is that include, very small restaurants and with an event center, with the idea of getting at these ideas that Doc is promoting. So the master plan had some flexibility language, in terms of, but the general principles of the master plan are obviously to be adhered with.
What would be nice to do is to actually place pins and draw that western edge and the polygon so that people knew where it was. And then when we talked about it, that's what we're talking about. It's not an amorphous, it could be 10 feet this way or 25 feet this way. This is where the boundary is.
We've done that.
Yes.
We can do it again.
But we need to do it because it then tells us how much land we're dedicating for park purposes. So now you have a square footage that you can use to make an estimate on purchasing.
Said it, the last thing, an estimate on purchasing, which we need to get to by July 12th to put something on the ballot. So, are we buying the polygon or are we not buying the polygon? You say it's part of the park. And I kind of get this two levels, that we're at a zoning level, we're flying high, not at all 10,000 feet, but we're flying high looking at uses and land uses and generalities. But when we get to the 12th, we've got to have very specific, on the ground, surveyed kind of things and dollars, which we don't know because we don't own this land and a third party owns it. We will have to, in some form, negotiate these things. I'm just saying, is it the zoning that gives us the best protection, or is it the master plan that gives us the best protection? To make sure that, we have a strong fallback position. I'm not a lawyer, but a strong regulatory, let's say, fallback position to make sure that the wishes of the town are carried out, whatever final thing we decide.
Well, let me throw out a couple things. One is that there is still, the Friends of the Park who are talking about purchasing, okay, so.
May or may not be that we have to have a stake in the ground by July 12th. So we don't know that for sure. And I think, just for the purposes, because we kind of get stuck in the mud sometimes, and I think this question is meant to say, do we generally agree? This is a work session, so we're not going to vote on one map or another map, but is there anybody who thinks we are way off course and wants to go a different direction? Except for you two. You can't say right now. Anybody on council who thinks we're way off course? Okay.
I would add one thing to the zoning. Maybe your specifying a certain amount of stuff, I would go ahead and specify maybe half of the parking would be subsurface. So that way they would have to generate some underground parking.
Okay,
But other than that,
yes, Jen?
Since Mark brought that, I do have a point about it, and it's clarification on how many square feet of parking necessary for a condo tile for one space per bedroom. And since this is a work session, if you can come back to us with that figure, and then as well, come back with footprint and total building and off-street parking square footage is necessary for a clarification on that is, with solely the park, is the town only utilizing off-street parking for that area?
Solely for the park in these plans?
Correct.
Yes. There is some thought that you could put parking underneath the pavilion in a sense, tandem it with the development, but if you subtract the development, it's surface parking.
Okay.
Is that good? Okay. Oh, sorry, Bernie.
So are you rolling up these 5 questions in page 7 into one? Does it feel good?
No, I was
Or are we
just
going now
asking
to look
one
or-
question,
Okay,
the first one,
okay.
which was, is there any,
Yes, big V.
little V?
Polygon.
Oh, yeah, right. So,
So
I
we're
mean,
agreeing to big V plus polygon.
we're in general agreement that, yes. Because we're only talking about the park, we're not talking about how much square feet of development or heights. But now, the next question is, does council agree?
Are you generally okay at this stage? Remember, again, you haven't gotten public input yet. Are you generally okay with the number of stories and height that we're reflecting in the zoning?
Okay, so we've got heights that are different on different parcels. Yep. Right. So Gary, and then Jen.
you know, the height thing was a big issue for me when I voted against one of these resolutions that we had was, you know, because the reality is when you put 2.5 floors, especially on the CDC parcel, you know, now we have a number attached to that, but there are pieces that you can go higher. And I don't understand why would we put anything that would make it higher than, you know, basically, because I think you said the RMI building's 36 feet, correct? The RMI is 38?
It says
34.8.
34.8. All right, so, you know, my big concern was trying to keep the height similar to that, because you kind of see it now, and so you want to keep that height kind of consistent throughout. You know, a few feet is no big deal, except for, I just wanted to go through the exceptions in it on how you make it bigger. And so, you know, I'd really love to hear how you make it bigger and why you would make it bigger.
Actually,
Well, as I kind of talked about earlier, the key goal here was to establish what a working sort of volumetric model would be for a building to go on each of these sites. The reference for that model was taken from the street level. On the CDC parcel, the grade starts to drop towards the river as you move away from the road. So in order for us to use a reference point of providing for a 2.5 story option with a 38-foot sort of encapsulation on that ground plane and that sort of upper roof, yes, it will be higher on the south end of the building as the grade slopes away. We don't know exactly what that would be. We just didn't get into it, and we don't know where the building's going quite. So we couldn't do that. And what we also didn't want to do was to propose stepping the building down in its middle somewhere to react to a grade change. Because functionally speaking, that takes away a lot of options for the use of the building, which at the end of the day, for most people, the perception of mass tends to be kind of a general scale issue with a base versus the height off of that base. And if you were to line up a couple of different buildings together with a 4 to 6 foot difference between them, I don't think most people would recognize a difference in height there, especially when that upper floor is stepped back.
So really what you're talking about is, we're talking about probably about a 4-foot difference between, a 38-foot building and a 42-foot building, but it would be all kind of within that. There's not another option to magically go much higher, even if it steps off.
No, the 4 feet, there's a little note there where your first 4 feet don't count, and after that, it actually counts toward the height.
Okay.
And then there's a parapet that's allowed. And then just the normal, the town code has a normal section about things that can go above the height, and those would apply just like any other district.
Jim. So then, that is my question about the up to 4 foot of an underground parking structure that extends above approved grade shall not count against maximum height limits. And does that as well go along with the facade parapet of up to 4 feet for a total of 8 feet that does not count towards? So effectively, when we're talking on the CDC parcel about 2.5 stories, 38 feet, it actually can be construed as 46 feet. Yes.
If I can't add in the meeting, but,
Again, there is going to be a difference. The goal of the 38 feet was to establish a base pedestrian plane, if you will, that relates to the street and the sidewalk, and that there could be some changes in there. Parking is, as has been called out, is going to be an issue here, which is something that has not been looked at in detail, specifically because it's a very detail-intensive type of exercise based on the size of the building, the shape of the building. All of those things come into play very, very specifically. And we're dealing with a high water table here. So we felt like we needed to at least acknowledge that in order to be able to get subsurface parking, there may need to be some concessions with the height of that structure from that water table. And as long as that was sort of within the elevation of the street in a reference point that made sense with the rest of downtown, that would be acceptable.
And then to counter with that, I'd like to put it out for public knowledge and within council that there have been some financial studies of underground parking in that area that come to the range of $60,000 per parking spot.
Okay, let me just throw out this one more thing, because I know that we started out initially talking volumetric, and some of us were just not comfortable with that. Gary wasn't, I wasn't, but I think that we do need to get somewhere down the road on this height issue, and the questions that Jen asked and Gary asked, if you look at the Roaring Fork Valley building heights and you think of the Elements Hotel is 45 feet. Here's my question. If you say, I'm bringing an application and I want to use CSC zoning, are we flexible in saying, well, we don't really want to go 38 feet? Or have we given them that as a right?
I don't think we've given that totally right. That's the purpose of the sketch plan and the final plan review, is to kind of review that in relationship to what's going around. I mean, generally we want to be in the ballpark, but I think that we could tweak it in the review process.
Because I, for one, would rather start the other side of it and make exceptions outside of it rather than try to fight backwards from 50 feet.
Was a little, Yeah, it's a little harder to do that because you could do a PUD, you know, if you do a variance, you have to do a hardship. Those are hard to prove. We don't have very many variances in the town. I don't know, Don is still listening. I don't know if he wanted to add anything to give us any guidance on that, but the P&Z actually had some language about flexibility, and decided it was better to have a,
Okay, so basically, we're being asked if we're okay with the heights as presented, with 38 plus being the max height on, Hannaford parcel. So, there's your question.
In relation to the BCC parcel, is it 45 plus 8 as well? Or is this the +4 plus, with a +4 on top would be relevant?
It's the same with kind of that additional provision that we had, the grocery store could go even a little higher.
Well, looking at this, I mean, I was trying to, when I was walking in, I was trying to look at the height differentials of all the pieces that you wrote in here. And you know, it's different when you look over there, and that building is just so big and blocking that, you know, I really want to get away from creating something of such a visual barrier. Even though we create these view planes, you still, if you create big barriers, it changes the character of what we have downtown. Because I see downtown as 2 floors, and we talked about this originally in the prior council, was trying to keep this in concert with what we have downtown, because you're kind of making it a full complement, especially with the V's and the views and everything else, that I was comfortable with the 2.5 stories if you stay below a certain height. I think once you get into the 40 range, you know, looking at the other 40 ranges, I'm not comfortable with that. I think you start getting into major blockage, and looking at this park and looking what has been created back there, if you start walking through these passive areas, do I want to see 46 feet? I don't. I want to see, you know, I could see RMI, and RMI to me was, you know, an appropriate scale. And you know, if you go 4 feet above RMI, I don't have an issue with that. 4 or 6 feet kind of difference is not a big deal. But when you start going 10 to 12 feet, you know, that to me was too much. So I'm okay if we bring it down. We don't have as many, you know, ways for it to expand upward. I'm pretty good with that, because I'm happy with keeping some flexibility in there. I just don't want, you know, it to expand to when you start adding 38 plus 8 is 46. So, and then the other ones I saw that, so.
Quick question, Susan. There's a lot, or maybe you've got something in here, but there's a lot of buildings in here in Aspen. Like, how tall is Bernard's building?
I don't know.
Wild guess.
I'd say the big Tommy's probably 33.
Okay. I just wanted to get an idea. Yeah.
Here's a question on the.
Oh. Oh, no, Don was gonna talk
The,
about it.
Just as we asked for the landscape architect to be creative on the park and come up with imaginations and so forth, we feel at the planning and zoning that we're asking the architect to do the same thing. In fact, we're almost demanding him to be a little bit more creative, to be in response to the town and to the park and everything we're talking about. Having a 2-story flat building all the way across there would be bad. And so allowing them to have some up and down in there helps that very scale that you're talking about. And we're not talking about having the whole thing 3.5 stories. Again, we're trying to encourage them to have some design creativity. And I think that's an important aspect to it.
I totally agree with that. I don't, my worry was going up to 46 feet. That was my worry. I'd love to see the variations and all that stuff. To me, that's, you know, really good design. You look through town, you don't see one height, but do you see 45 feet when you go to downtown? That was my main worry. And that's, yeah.
Let's just, if we could try, what if we? Yes. Yes, Don.
Yeah, you know, I have been able to track part of this conversation, not all of it, some of it's cut out, but I want to remind you, you've got height in here, but you're going to see a sketch development plan, and then you're going to see a final development plan. And if you think the result of those heights doesn't fulfill the master plan, is too blocky, is too much in your face, which I think it won't be. My point is, you got about 4 bites at the apple here. One is the text. 2 is that whether anybody brings in a map and does it, you're going to get to see what that idea is when they bring in the map. Rezone this way. 3, you're going to see the sketch plan. 4, you're going to see the final plan. So I guess my answer to the flexibility, or can we guess that it will be too high or not high enough today, is the way this is designed, you get a lot of time to look at it.
Okay.
And I agree with that.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, I'm just questioning, looking at the height differential, I'm just questioning council. Is everybody else okay with, the mix of heights to almost 46 feet on some areas? And looking at that, if you can help me, what size building did you pop in?
We popped that biggest building there, so I think that would be the 38 feet. But it's hard to say. That's an older.
It was one of the older low development plans. I can't tell you. I mean, I could go back and figure that out, but I wouldn't want to say.
Okay, can we, let me try this. Let's try this. If the downtown buildings are low 30s, and this says 38 feet, and we just say about 38 feet, I think what Don Elliott is saying to us is that we're going to look at this 1, 2, 3, 4 more times, all the times in the world that we want. And we're gonna make them show us their rendering next to Rocky Mountain Institute, and their building next to the ground, and their building next to the park. So in an effort to not wordsmith to death, opinion, we're not voting, we just, or is there anybody who's not okay saying approximately 38 feet?
Well, I'm with Gary. I'd go with 38, but I wouldn't allow the exemptions of
Okay.
up to 8 feet.
Okay, that's kind of how I feel.
I was just like, just give them
I would
a
not.
And I'm
height.
with them.
Well, certainly we're not the top.
I can pass this.
How about a little tweak on that?
Okay, I can tweak it.
So those are your dates. Okay.
Allow 38 feet with the opportunity to show some uniquely beneficial reason to consider more.
Up to 42 max.
Okay, up to 42.
If we just say 38 and they bring us something that they would like to have adjusted, we can adjust it when the actual application comes in, because we are not, I don't think we're going to be very effective at trying to design a building that we cannot see right now at all. And I think we're getting way far in the weeds,
What-
trying to decide exactly inches and feet.
Okay,
at this
what
point.
about approximately 38 feet, considering the overall architectural match with the downtown core?
I mean, I'm okay with that.
Isn't that what we're talking
Is
about?
anybody not okay with approximately 38 feet, and we're
From
gonna
the street,
review this to
from the
death?
river. That's what,
So,
yeah.
so this is, and I didn't get all the labels on there, but basically what that's saying is it's defining a baseline elevation. That baseline elevation could be 0 or it could be +4 from the street. Once you move away from the street, you'll note that that baseline elevation gets higher and higher as the ground drops away. Where the building sits on top of that, we don't know. We don't know what that distance is. So that's where this setting a absolute maximum starts to get a little difficult, because we don't know what the site constraints are specifically, but that was the intent, was to say, here's our baseline, here's the building height, we go from there, we don't look at what's below that as a definition of the height.
You got anything, Mark?
What's the baseline for downtown now?
You mean it's 30 feet, it's 30 feet, but we do allow 3 stories to go higher, in certain circumstances. But
So it's 30.
usually what happens, well, it's hard, it's really,
What's that zone up there?
oh, that's C2, and most of it's 30 feet, and then there's exceptions of how it can go to 40. 42, is it, James? 45?
I think it's 42 for third floors with hotels, third floors with all affordable housing.
I think that's the core, and that's where it should be. This is on the outer edge of the core, and I think it should be a little lower. That's my opinion.
Name your number.
I would
Well, I'm
do
thinking 38 feet.
Okay.
You do 38 feet from the
Jen was
the road. Oh, sorry.
I'm going to agree with what Gino said, that if we limit it to 2 stories, 30 feet, and then it's going to be a larger footprint, I would rather have a smaller footprint, have it be higher. And if there's a way that we can wordsmith it in there, it's mentioned in E, other site development standards are openings to the rivers, number 1. And there's no mention of width or the landscaping that's completed within the width. And so that's my take on that is I'm willing to go upwards if the view planes and width to the river expands equally.
And I think our deal is that, I think we've kind of decided we were gonna land on a number and then be flexible when an application came in.
Well, we can't really do it quite like that, but why don't we come, we've got the general idea.
Okay.
That you want some flexibility, I say we go back and work on that piece of
Okay.
it rather than do that.
And I just have something else I need to ask this council. We have actually added an executive session in this meeting for early on. We were scheduled to be finished with this portion at 7:45. If it's the council's pleasure to table the rest of these questions, or do you want to keep on going?
Keep going.
Okay, let's get a feel for everybody.
Well, I mean, to me, it's like, I think, you know, I think we have P and Z here, we gotta respect the
Okay.
fact that they're here. And let's see, it's like if Susan, you can
Yeah.
just play into that and say, hey, I think I got your gist,
Yep.
and we can move on.
Yeah, because this is
That
gonna
would
take
help
us
us a lot to move on, cause I
That's
think,
right.
I think everyone heard what our gist was on that, and we can move on.
Okay, so our next question is uses, are you good with uses?
Good with uses? Gary?
My big thing is on the CDC parcel, I am not comfortable with hotel or condominium hotel as an anchor use. I'm just not, I'm not comfortable with putting people living right on this beautiful park. I just don't want it, I don't wanna see it. I've seen condo hotels turn into condominiums over time, and then you all of a sudden have residential. I don't wanna see residential type uses there. I think the BCC parcel is the perfect place to put it. You know, the reality is, yes, it would be nice to have a park area next to the frying pan. The problem is you have people living on the other side of the frying pan, and they complain about the noise all the time. The Riverside cannot, you know, have music past a certain time. They can't have loud music, they can't do this, and it's because you have people living. I'm not comfortable with that. I think I've said it many, many times. I mean, my use, I do not want to see that type of use there. I want to encourage the hotel here. If somebody comes in with a development proposal, it's a beautiful place for a condo hotel with more than 40 rooms. So I do not want to see, I'm happy with all the other uses that are proposed on here. I like the secondary uses. I agree with Jen on the fact that daycare needs to be a secondary use. It's not an anchor use to me. But, you know, on the CDC parcel, looking at the, you know, brew pub distillery being an anchor use, entertainment and community center are the 3 really big ones for me. Adding a hotel and a condominium hotel is just not gonna work for me. You know?
And Gary and I have said the same thing all along for the same reason, which is, you know, if we're gonna make the star of this show the park and events and all these noisy vitality things that we wanna do, it's not compatible.
And you and Gary both feel that way about
For
a hotel
Yes.
versus a condominium hotel, which I understand what you're saying
Either.
becomes
Either,
more residential.
me.
Okay, so both.
it's a
Same,
it's a
yeah.
sleeping, partying compatibility thing for me.
Okay. And Gary, you feel the same?
I do, because I think we have perfect opportunities in, you know, when you're looking at this, the whole point was to look at this as a vision and a vision of downtown. And you already have 2 hotels with other lodging options throughout the town. And, you know, people go, well, they're not good enough. And I'm like, well, somebody come in, let's zone it correctly over there. Let somebody come in and truly offer up something really beautiful, condominium hotel over there, because you already have residential uses. It's stepping into the residential area, where here, it's not. And I truly have an issue because we have removed the residential piece out of there because we said it's dangerous out of the floodplain. I do not feel it's right to put people back living over there, and I really don't want to block any of the potential events or anything else that we could have up here.
So maybe we do hotel first and then condominium hotel. We've heard from 2
Let's see, who else? Wait, can you weigh in, or?
It's separate it by hotel and condominium hotel.
Well, for me, absolutely no to condominium hotel. Along the lines of which Gary was just describing, we just removed our affordable housing, and to replace it with high-end housing is unpalatable to me. I understand what you're saying about the hotel, and that would concern me as well, but I'm not as adamantly against a hotel as you two.
Do you want to keep
Described.
it in the anchor use table?
I'm not opposed to it being an anchor use.
Okay, Bern?
Well, I'll take the other side of the table and the other side of the argument. I think a condo hotel is one of the few realistic, significant commercial options we have to revitalize the downtown, which I think it's not dying, but it's suffering, clearly. And to say that a perfect place for a developer to come in would be the old Clark's Marketplace, which is owned by 7 different interlocking ownerships, there's no immediate likelihood of that transpiring. So how many years are you going to wait for very little economic stimulus of a significant kind to occur to revitalize our historic downtown? So I put a lot more weight on that. I love the park. I think the park plan that Post has come up with is marvelous. I think it drives and vitalizes that whole parcel of land, and I totally support that and moving ahead, finding our funding to do our vision. Mike has thrown out a very rough, not even a ballpark figure of $5 million to get what we're looking at, get that vitality, get those wonderful features of a pavilion, a brew pub, the idea of essentially a food court that could operate with a common eating area, go year round, have heaters, have event, ice sculpture, all of that is wonderful, I'm for it. But I don't think we can ignore the fundamental economics of the whole parcel. And I have heard opinions, which I respect, from my colleagues whom I respect, that there is some fundamental inability of a residential hotel to coexist peacefully with a park. I have not heard that from park planning experts or seen studies on that. My own belief is, yes, we could make some reasonable limitations on park activities that would be reasonable. 10 o'clock, loud music up to 9 o'clock, quieter music, some activity up to 10, that people would know it but going in about it. As far as the economics, we only have one real developer who's come knocking on our door, and even that developer has not signed anything to engage us. He's waiting to see what we come up with. The community center is great, but who's going to come and do it? Who's going to pay to build it? Who's going to pay the tremendous costs to annually support it and activate it? at some time, we will have to come to the people with a realistic proposal that has an economic foundation on which I think people will come up with money to pay for that general concept. But I think that has to be balanced by some economic fundamentals, that they see some economic driving force weighing this tremendous recreational benefit. So as far as a hotel, yes, we would like to see a pure hotel. I agree with that. Put that up as one of our uses. As someone who's been in business and finance, when you have a New Elements hotel, I don't know that that's economically feasible for a developer. Certainly the condominium model that we've seen in Aspen of a hotel has worked well as a balance of both residents and usage. And those are the Gant and the Aspen Inn, I believe, and Aspen Square. And I'm familiar with both of those, and people live in them about 6 months of the year. They rent them out, and there's a variety in between. But the financial incentives are great to keep them rented, and that's giving us social activity year-round, downtown, in our stores. And I think that is a value that is being underplayed when you just look at the recreational value, which I totally support. So the fact of the matter is a condo hotel is much less risky to a developer because individuals are buying units, taking the risk off all the bricks and mortar costs to a large extent. And that's obviously why Low Enterprises has identified that as the most likely prospect to put on that. So does it have to be 55,000 feet? No, I don't know what would work. The alternate arrangement we had by the citizens group was still 43,000 square feet of development. That's significant, but who's going to come and give it to you? We have somebody identified who's real, who has the experience and the financial backing to make that happen with us and to be a partner in the costs of this development. I don't think it necessarily has to be 55,000 square feet, but I have to think somewhere in the area of 45,000 square feet could be attractive to this developer and could represent a reasonable compromise, and that's what I would recommend.
Okay, Mark.
I'm aligned with Bernie, pretty much, maybe not quite 45, but I've always been of the mind of a nice 35-room hotel fishing lodge with a restaurant and someplace for all these RMI visitors to at least go and spend the night right next door, and it's a good location. So I would have to say leave it on there.
Condo hotel as well?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Jen? I am in between Bernie and Katie. That what it comes down to. Bye.
He's so tired of us.
Yeah.
I'm a little tired of us.
My big thing, and I'm taking this language from, I don't remember where, I've done so much homework on this, but as long as it's feasible to sustain and to develop. I think that is a core, that may have come from the DAC report, I don't know where it came from, but that's really what it comes down to. In my wildest dreams, if someone comes to the town and hands us $10 million for a legacy park, sure, I am definitely gonna jump on board for that. We can't hold our breath for Prince Charming. We need to stratify our options, and I am more towards Katie on a hotel versus the condominium hotel. Another caveat that I have that I mentioned before is I'm not game for the town of Basalt subsidizing the parking. That's the big hang up with it, is where are these people going to park that are going to be lodged on the CDC property? And yes, it's a tax benefit, the tax base of the lodging, but when it comes down to the cost for the parking, I'm perplexed by that one, and that's the one where it doesn't work out to be feasible to develop and sustain when I run the numbers that way at $60,000 per parking spot. In addition, beyond the CDC parcel, on the on the BCC parcel, I would like to see community housing added as an anchor use. Because it can be combined, and I see that that's where it's a secondary use, but why limit ourselves if we are talking about if a hotel wants to redevelop there and part of it is affordable housing, that's fantastic. Or the possibility of, same thing with a town hall down below or a grocery store, whatnot, with community housing above. I'd like to see that on the anchor use table.
Okay, I guess everybody weighed in on that. Just FYI, I mean, the actual person who is interested in developing that parcel right now has clearly stated he will only do a condo hotel, that the public will be paying for his underground parking, and so that's the person who's in front of us, or who would like to be in front of us right now. So, I mean, we can leave it on there, but, so can we move on with this one?
Yep, we'll move on. I think for now, we'll just leave it in a little bit more discussion. The next question, can the P and Z go ahead, take the information they've heard? I think would make some changes and go to public hearing, and then you would see it. Do I have a okay on that?
Why not? Public hearing is where it's happening.
Okay, so then,
Yeah, Jen?
Should we voice Auden's?
No.
No, okay.
So actually, I think we're down now to the last two questions, because we actually got to take one off. And so the next question is, are you supportive of Post's efforts to continue on with their planning efforts as they've described them?
Yes.
Okay. And then the last question has to do with the, working towards the July 12th presentation deadline. Pam handed me the dates for the election, and with these dates, we would have time to make a final decision by August 23rd, but obviously we want a first and second reading. So are you still good? Yeah, are you still good with the July 12th deadline and kind of what we had outlined?
Tell us again, what is the deadline of?
Well, this was
Make a final decision to send something to the ballot?
This is the presentation on the cost for the park, so that you can start making those decisions about how you're gonna move forward.
Okay. I mean, we need that information anyway, so.
Okay. Okay, so I think that's actually all of my questions, and so we're done.
Thank you.
What?
Yes. Yeah. Is everybody okay with not a break?
Yes.
I mean, individual breaks or
No, I want to keep going.
individual
Thank you.
breaks? As needed. Thanks so much. Bye, guys.
Good work.
Okay, so,
She's like looking for permission.
can somebody get Pam so we can start?
She's coming.
Okay.
So you two are going to be able to sign checks, is that what that is?
We've always been able to, I've always been able to sign checks,
But is now Gary added?
I guess.
Well, as the pro tem, if she leaves.
Yeah,
He
so
ha-
both of you are able to sign checks, in addition to Pam and Judy.
Right.
So, question answered.
Oh, it's got my name on it. Holy cow.
Isn't that cute? You get one too.
Could you give that back? Is there just one page of that? Oh, there's,
Yeah.
okay. There you go, Gary. Doesn't it go back to her? Or back?
I was like, what do I want?
Oh, everybody left anyway.
People need to learn to do the orders. Come on.
I know, we're gonna be out here.
No going to the bathroom, no breaks.